Hello, everybody. This is Georgianne Hughes, and this is The Bite Show. And it's a blessing to have Olaf Hage with us. And tonight we're going to talk about Tesla, Mars, and 2012. Olaf has really cooked up something interesting tonight. And go to before 2012 and beyond.com. Olaf has some fantastic material there, and you need to get acquainted with it. It is just amazing. So anyway, let's jump right in this. Hi, Olaf.
Hi, Georgianne.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Are you buried under snow?
No, well, that's a matter of speaking, I guess. The snow is about to go. It is almost gone. We had levels higher than I am for much of the winter.
And
here it is in early April, and the snow is starting to finally disappear from the ground, and we can see grass, and we can see the pavement again and so forth. So it's not so bad now.
Yeah.
But you still have to drive around some of the piles in the middle of the road here where I live. So it's it's disappearing. But we did have a really brutal winter. It was pretty serious here.
Wow.
Times they are changing.
Oh, yeah, they are. And it's pretty clear, I do believe, that we are headed toward an ice age. Isn't that right?
Well, yeah, we're overdue to get back into an ice age, and actually we've gone through some near misses as the sun has been cycling down out of its warm phase and into its cold phase over the last several centuries. We had the so-called Maunder minimum little ice age, and lasted, I guess, a couple hundred years or so. And from the 1600s into the early 1800s. And then we got this big volcanic eruption in 1814 and put an end to the Napoleonic Wars, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, and then on into the 19th century, things started to warm up. People went out of doors again much more.
Yeah.
They started to enjoy the warmth and the fresh air and sunlight again. It was like coming out of a long, dark winter. And they started to see funny things in the sky.
Yeah.
How's that for a segue?
Yeah, that's a pretty good one.
And what they were seeing were called airships because nobody knew what else to call them. And
today we call them UFOs.
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
They were odd-looking objects. Some of them apparently were sort of UFOs.
Yeah.
Shape. Some of them, however, looked more like, I don't know, a long extended balloon with a gondola underneath of it.
Yeah.
Or they had all kinds of peculiar shapes. And I remember seeing, I think it was a Walt Disney, what would you call it, a documentary or something on the Walt Disney program back in the 1950s.
Yeah.
I forget what they called it then. I guess it was called Fantasyland or Tomorrowland, or I don't know. They had some name for it. Disneyland, Disney World, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. And he did a documentary on the airships of the 19th century. And, of course, a lot of people, it was all about the strange craft that people were building and testing as they got into flight. And as a young person watching this, I thought, wow, that's neat. Look at all those weird-looking dirigibles or balloons or whatever they are. But there was something else in the sky. Like you said, there were some strange airships in the sky, and they weren't piloted by ordinary walking around human beings like us.
Right.
They were piloted by something else. And in some cases, people got, because they would fly very low, people got a look at these occupants, and they said they didn't look like Americans. They looked maybe like Chinese people. You know, they had sort of strange-looking eyes. They were a little short in stature.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little later on, they got a closer look because a couple of these craft crashed.
Oh.
And one crashed in Childress, Texas, and another one crashed in Aurora, Texas, and it was about the same time in 1897 that these events happened. And it was in April, actually. It was a little over 100 years ago, about 100, what would we call this here, 110, 112 years ago. And they had some very odd-looking creatures on those craft, because it turned out, and I don't know, maybe two of them collided with each other or something, but they said that the little men or beings who were on the craft were not very tall at all. They described them as being about 3 or 4 feet tall, not very large. And they didn't look, they didn't look like us. And in one case, they buried the guy. I think that was in Aurora, Texas. Government came along with some wagons and picked up all the pieces of the craft and hauled it away. And in the other case, they buried the creatures. I don't know what happened to the craft there. That would be the one in Childress. I don't know if they picked up the debris there. But the interesting thing is these Stevensville UFO sightings at the beginning of 2008, a little over a year ago, were right near this area. So this is that part of central Texas there. And whatever these craft were, they weren't just seen in Texas. In fact, they were seen pretty much all over the United States. Wherever there were people to observe them, put it a better way. And people went out of doors, as I said, starting to enjoy the warmth and the change in climate. In the 19th century, everybody was very optimistic. They were building factories. The Industrial Revolution was underway. They had developed telegraph, and electricity was starting to come into use. And we had gotten out of whale oil as a fuel, and we were into burning coal and soon crude oil in the 1850s. And the world was changing. There was a lot of new technology coming along. And in 1856, over in Serbia, in the northern Balkans, a man named Nikola Tesla was born to a Greek Orthodox minister. His father was a pacifist, and he had hoped that Nikola would grow up and become, Nikola would grow up and become a Greek Orthodox priest like he was. They get married and have kids, obviously. And Nikola didn't want to do that. He was interested in electronics, and he was homeschooled, by the way. If there were ever a testimony for being homeschooled, it's Nikola Tesla, because it certainly produced a genius in his case, and they weren't even educating him about electronics. They wanted him to be a priest, and he grows up to be one of the world's great thinkers and inventors. Well, he learned to do calculus in his head. Really bright guy, okay? And when he was born over here in the United States, I believe Millard Fillmore was president of the United States, and I think the Dred Scott decision was that year, 1856, if my memory is correct. We were gearing up for our Civil War. Yeah. Slavery was still the rule of the Confederacy area there. So it was a different world. And yet people were seeing funny things in the sky. They couldn't quite explain what they were, and nobody really took them seriously. And every now and then there would be a sighting of something, and it would disappear, and nobody paid a whole lot of attention, supposedly in official circles. But that wasn't really true. It turns out that there was what was called an aeronautics club The Aeronautics Club was out in California. It had been set up by some wealthy East Coast investors. A lot of rich guys back east had pooled their money for the purpose of importing inventors and engineers from Europe and other parts of the world and bringing them to this secret, what would we call it, Area 51 type facility.
Okay.
This is in the 1850s, so you've got to allow for some different. And they brought all of these smart guys and dumped them into California, somewhere to the east of San Francisco. In the, I guess, I'm not sure it was the Central Valley. I forget the exact location, but it was not too far from San Francisco, but inland. And they had an airfield, and they were experimenting with all sorts of ideas about special gases that would be lighter than air and other ways of elevating the craft off the ground. They wanted to create ultimately a heavier than air craft. And they worked on a lot of innovative designs. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of the Army sent a guy out west, and in those days there was no railroad yet.
Yeah.
Remember, the Transcontinental Railroad wasn't completed until May 10th of 1869, after the Civil War. So this is before the Civil War. They sent a guy out there, and the Army wanted to know if they would be willing to accept financing from the federal government, or at least from the Department of the Army Department, or War Department, I guess it was called at the time, in exchange for which they would receive the benefits of their technology. And they were rebuffed, or the Army guy was rebuffed, because he was told basically, well, we've already got all the money we need from some investors back east, and we're not really interested. We have other things we want to do. And before anyone jumps to the conclusion that they were trying to develop this so that you and I could fly, well, nothing happened for another 57 years, right? Till the Wright brothers came up with their own airplane back east to North Carolina. So apparently they weren't doing this for us, and they weren't doing it for the Army. That leaves a kind of small universe of possibilities, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So they were working for some people back east in the United States. Now, back east is a kind of a vague term, so let's specify a little bit more what that meant. I doubt they were working for people who owned plantations in the South. And I doubt that they were working for people who were Midwestern subsistence farmers. But there was money to be had back east in the cotton milling industry, or possibly in the New England textile mills, or some of the Northeast factory guys. They were, into a lot of, they were making a lot of money, and they were looking for things to invest in. And we were just starting to see steel being produced.
Yeah.
So guys like Carnegie, I don't know if he was around at that point, but you'd be seeing people of that ilk, if you will, making these investments, I guess. But the Industrial Revolution really got its kickstart from the Civil War. That's when we really geared up. And that hadn't really begun just yet. So it's unclear exactly who was financing this. But, there are some people who had money, and there were guys like lawyers, importers, people in the northeastern part of the country who were merchant traders, people who owned ships, not the captains, but the people who owned groups of ships and so forth. Guys like that. Old money from Britain, old English money.
Okay.
That, was being reinvested New England in the Northeast. Money like that, maybe. But there are a couple of clues here. Some of the engineers were from Germany. And that suggests that we might want to ask if there were any German connections in the Northeast who were very secretive, had a lot of money, were involved with professions like law or importing or whatever, where they might have had the ability to have excess funds to invest, and who might have been interested in advanced esoteric technologies and things of that kind. Let's see now. Let's see, what do we have here? Oh, wait, I got one. There was a chapter of the Bavarian German Illuminati at Yale University called the Skull and Bones Society since the early 1830s.
Yeah.
And by the late 1850s, about a quarter of a century had gone by, and that would have been about the same time. They probably by that time had spent a quarter century scratching each other's backs and helping each other climb the ladder of success in America. And they probably had a lot of excess money to throw around. I would guess that some members of the Skull and Bones Society, yeah, I'm talking the 1850s, folks, the Skull and Bones Society may have been involved in the investing in this secret society of aeronautics engineers. So we got two secret groups, one back east that's coming up with money, and one out west that's doing experiments they don't even want our own government to know about. And that kind of implies that whatever they were developing, they didn't intend to share with the general public. There's just too much secrecy involved. And as we know, they didn't share it.
Right.
And so as the 1800s progressed, somebody apparently was coming up with more advanced technologies than we knew about. Now, it turns out the co-founder of the Skull and Bones Society, a guy named Alonzo P. Taft, T-A-F-T, yeah, like the president, very much like the president, who was his son. Yeah, that Taft. But the father of President Taft, the father of President William Howard Taft, was named Alonzo. I think his middle name was Phineas. Alonzo P. Taft, anyway. And he was the co-founder of the Skull and Bones Society back in the early 1830s at Yale University. He'd gone over to Germany, and he had gotten a charter to set up a chapter of the Bavarian German Illuminati, which they called the Skull and Bones Society here in the United States. So we see the lineage here. They had foreign German connections behind what they were doing, and then we have a secret group in their part of the country, in the Northeast apparently, who were financing out west this aeronautics club and importing engineers from, among other places, from Germany. Maybe it's just an ephemeral connection, but it's starting to kind of flesh out a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
Well, 1870, just after the Civil War, when Alfonso P. Taft had grown up and become a prominent lawyer, he was a cabinet official in the Ulysses S. Grant administration. So the co-founder of Skull and Bones was one of the cabinet members in the Grant administration. Now, why is that important? Well, it turns out that in 1870, the Department of Naval Intelligence was testing on its ships in, I guess, Baltimore Harbor, Chesapeake Bay. They were testing a new technology, 1870. Okay, that new technology was radio. Now, that's a good 30 years before Nikola Tesla invented it. And so, and of course all this stuff's declassified now, but at the time, this was very hush-hush. We wanted to have the advantage of being able to communicate by radio at sea, and yet the British continued to dominate the sea waves, the oceans, for decades after that. We had this amazing technology, but it didn't seem as though we were doing much with it until the 1890s, when we started to have ships powered by diesel. We had vessels that were at sea, and coal and diesel. The diesel power, I guess, was right near the end of that period, but we certainly had steamships, military naval vessels. And it was about this time that the airships came back with a vengeance. And in the fall of 1896, in the Grover Cleveland administration, right after the November election, the airships started to appear again. Now, one little point I need to mention here before I go on, because I want to demonstrate something. In 1893, Nikola Tesla was at the top of his game. He had put together, with the help from Westinghouse, 100,000 electric light bulbs, which was a brand new invention at the time. Put together 100,000 AC current electric light bulbs, not like Edison's DC bulb. And he illuminated the Chicago Columbian Exposition. Now, this had started the preceding fall in October, commemorating the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus in 1492 in October. And in October of 1892, the 400th anniversary of Columbus's discovery of America was celebrated with a tremendous exhibition, or what we would call a World's Fair, in Chicago. And Nikola Tesla lit the place up at night, and they created a city of light. And this is the first time anybody had seen what we call a nightlight. We look at Las Vegas or New York or other cities at night, and we see them all lit up and everything. In Tokyo, the Ginza section, or whatever they call it there, or Paris at night or something like that. And we think, wow, isn't that something? Well, the first city to ever see this kind of thing happen was Chicago in 1893. It was in May of 1893, that the switch was pulled and all of Tesla's bulbs lit up. And there was George Westinghouse, the inventor of the railway air brake, who had financed it and who put his money into Tesla's electronic stuff and transformers and stuff. And today, of course, Westinghouse makes nuclear power plants.
Yeah.
But at the time, this was all a new idea for Westinghouse, and they were backing AC alternating current, which is what powers the world today. And that, of course, was invented entirely, top to bottom, by Nikola Tesla. All of the devices that give us AC power, the motors, the transformers, the transmission, all of the things that you need to make it work, all of that, the generators, everything, was developed by Nikola Tesla. He invented the whole industry. We couldn't be having this conversation. People couldn't be hearing it. You couldn't have lights in your house the way you do. Or certainly refrigerators that run nonstop for 30 years. All of that is due to Nikola Tesla's genius. He invented all this stuff. And in 1893, he had come to America, becoming a citizen of the United States, and he was going to give us everything that he could. Now, the amazing part about it is, I said he was born in Serbia. He went to Czechoslovakia to work as an engineer. Then he went to Hungary, Budapest, worked there as an engineer. Then he went to France, to Paris. He worked there as an engineer. Then he went to Germany, and he worked there as an engineer. electrical engineer, of course, mostly. And then he went to England and to the United States. And he was sent to the United States. He had just literally less than 25 cents in his pocket when he arrived in the United States. But he was told that Thomas Edison was going to give him a job and that he was going to do very well in America. So he literally spent his last dime, and he'd made a lot of money as an engineer in Europe. He spent his last dime to get to America. He goes to New Jersey, shakes hands with Thomas Edison, hands him a piece of paper for recommendation from somebody over in Europe. And the guy said, "This guy's a genius. You need to hire him, put him to work," and so forth. And Thomas Edison jokingly said, "Well, I'm having some problems with my generators in New York, and I got some things I haven't quite worked out." Tesla said, "Okay, I'll fix it. What do you give me?" He says, "If you can fix all these problems, I'll pay you $50,000, which is worth $1 million today."
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of money. Actually worth $2 million today, technically. But that's what he said. Okay, so Tesla went out and he literally fixed everything that was wrong with Edison's DC direct current electrical system. He fixed it all. And he comes back to Edison and he says, "It's all fixed. You can go check, call up your people and check and verify. I've fixed all the problems. Everything's working perfectly now." And it was. And so Edison, whose system was falling apart, not working right, was fixed by Nikola Tesla. Edison turns around and Tesla's saying, "So where's my 50,000?" And Edison turns around and says, "Oh, I was just joking."
Oh.
Well, Tesla wasn't joking. He fixed his system for him. He got it to work, and of course made Edison's reputation out of that.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of a feud that separated direct current, Edison, and General Electric on one side, and Marconi, and RCA, and those guys, from Nikola Tesla and Westinghouse and AC current, alternating current, on the other side. And even though Tesla won the battle over AC versus DC, the fact of the matter is that by the time he won the battle, he had to give up his stake in his patents and so forth for an amount of money which in those days was not inconsiderable. The original story that was circulated said that he'd been paid $150,000 for his patents.
Yeah.
Now, in those days, that was the equivalent in modern terms of about $6 million. Do you know what he was actually paid?
Probably nothing.
$1 million.
Oh, he was?
Yes. And today, that would be worth a fortune. He was worth tens of millions in modern terms.
Okay.
A lot of money. He lived in luxurious hotels like the Waldorf Astoria, waited on hand and foot in hotel rooms for the rest of his life, till the day he died. People cooked for him, they changed his sheets, the hotel took care of him, and he lived that way for the rest of his life. And he lived to be 86 years old. Now, if you're doing the math, he died in January of 1943. So he lived 86 years from 1856 to 1943, technically, a little over 86 years. And in that time, Tesla's life can be divided into two basic parts. The first 43 years, where his star was rising, and he could do no wrong.
Right.
And everything he did turned to gold, literally. And then the last 43 years of his life, where it seemed as though everything he did went sour, and things just kept going downhill for him.
Huh.
And he spent the money he made the first half of his life living out the latter half of his life, living quite nicely, mind you. But nevertheless, he spent that to survive during the last 43 years of his life. And while $1 million is a lot of money, you divide it into 43 years, and it begins to whittle down.
You bet.
So even in 10 years, it's only worth $100,000 a year, and so it was worth about $21,000 a year, which is a princely sum in the early part of the century. But as time went by, cost of living went up, his savings were going down, and Nikola Tesla had to seek work from other people, and he ended up working for, of all people, the communists. He was doing business with Stalin near the end of his life. So Tesla had a problem, which was, that things turned sour for him after about the beginning of 1900. Back to 1893. So there he is. It's May of 1893, and we know that the guy who threw that switch was none other than President-elect Grover Cleveland. Not President-elect. He was sworn in March, so he'd been president for just a few months. He had been president before that. He's the only president to leave office and then come back and return 4 years later. And Grover Cleveland threw the switch in May of 1893 that lit up Chicago and eventually lit up the world with Nikola Tesla's AC alternating current technology. But here's the rest of the story. So far, what I've told you is pretty much, the usual stuff you hear or read about Nikola Tesla, except for the part about the airships. Because you see, in 1896, when William McKinley won the presidency in November, almost immediately a bunch of airships began to appear in California, near San Francisco. And they started spreading slowly eastward. And the airship sightings continued until they got all the way across the country, 3,000 miles away, on into 1897. In March of 1897, William McKinley became President of the United States. Now, Grover Cleveland was a Democrat. McKinley was a Republican. He was from Ohio. And he had been governor, I believe, in Ohio. He came to the presidency as a very much beloved, very much trusted fellow. People thought the world of him. They thought he was a great guy. And McKinley found himself confronting this airship thing because it was spreading all around the country. More and more people were seeing them. And some of these creatures were clearly not human. And the general belief of the public was that they were from either China, if they looked at all human, or Mars.
Yes.
Now, you probably are wondering why anybody would think they were from Mars. The sightings continued, by the way, into 1898, and then off and on they appeared every now and then. There's a couple of sightings around 1900, 1901, 1903, and then suddenly a big flurry of sightings in 1909, 100 years ago. And they were of mysterious inventors who were claiming that they had invented these airships and were flying them around the country to demonstrate the technology. Okay? Now, that's what we were told. But, obviously there were some problems. In 1898, H.G. Wells' book, War of the Worlds, about a Martian invasion of the United States, was published. And H.G. Wells was British, and he wrote this book. He was a socialist, by the way. And he wrote this book, War of the Worlds, that said that Martians who've been watching us for some time with interest, decided to invade our planet, and they landed in the United States. As I understand it, I actually haven't read the book. I'm only going by the movie and the Orson Welles version of it, so I assumed that it was in the United States. But anyway, and it created quite a public sensation. No sooner had that book appeared than the airship sighting flap of 1896 to 1898 stopped. Now, I mention this for a couple of reasons. First of all, because it shows that there was a widespread belief that there were Martians and that they were coming here. And number two, it shows that when the public has a book or fictional account in its hands, it is being entertained, the subject, that does not stimulate new sightings, but if anything, they seem to decline. So, there's this theory that people go out and see UFOs because they've been watching movies or reading books. I don't think so. Now, back to the airships. You're Grover Cleveland. You've got a few months left in office, and you're a lame duck president, okay? You know the next president will be Bill McKinley, that he'll be a Republican. You're a Democrat. You're on your way out. But November, December, January, February, into March, you're going to possibly be plagued with this problem for several months. What do? Do you just sit and wait? Or do you call somebody to Washington and say, hey, you're a smart guy, you understand technology, you know a lot about this sort of thing, can't you give us some insight into what's going on here? Now, who would you ask? I mean, in a world of a million possibilities, who do you think Grover Cleveland would have asked to come to Washington and have a conversation about these strange airships in the sky? Nikola Tesla.
Oh, of course.
I don't have any proof of that. But if I were Grover Cleveland, and I had met Nikola Tesla personally, and I had seen what he did in Chicago and all the other things he had accomplished, and he was the most famous inventor scientist of the day, I think I'd ask him for advice. I'd call him in. Now, you get 12 people like this together in a room, 12 guys like Tesla, okay, advising the president about this sort of thing. You know what we call that? MJ-12. I don't for a minute believe that MJ-12 was created during the Harry Truman administration. I have absolutely no confidence in that claim. For one thing, we know that there was all kinds of other activity before Roswell. And the claim is that Roswell triggered Truman to create MJ-12. But when you got all of this other stuff going on, we had UFOs crash, two of them. One in Los Angeles and one in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, where Rush Limbaugh was born. Gee, I wonder if there's a connection. Back in 1942, the year before Nikola Tesla died. In fact, months before Nikola Tesla died, within a year of his death, there were two UFO crashes in the United States. Again, one in Los Angeles in February and another one in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And you cannot tell me that the government wasn't interested. We were shooting at the ones that flew over Los Angeles in February of 1942. And clearly we would have been interested in the subject. There were UFOs sighted in 1934, in 1926, in 1918. Very interesting event in 1918, for example, is during World War I. The British have a bunch of regiments stationed in Turkey. They're guarding the Dardanelles, the straits that lead from the Black Sea out into the Aegean and the Mediterranean. And they are up on the high hills and plateaus overlooking strategic points and so forth. So, you know, the military, the army, they like to occupy the hilltops. And they had a regiment of 1,000 British soldiers situated atop one hilltop, and they had other, you know, regiments on top of their other nearby hilltops. And one day they watched in 1918, remember the war is winding down, and they saw a large, strange-looking cloud descend down on top of this hilltop where there were 1,000 British soldiers. The cloud stayed there for a few minutes, and then it lifted away. Meanwhile, they had wired communication with that British regiment, and it had suddenly and mysteriously stopped. So after a while, they got suspicious. They sent a scout over to check the place out, see what was going on, see why the communications were down. A normal thing. It happens a lot. Nobody thought that much of it at first. But when they arrived at the top of the hill, there was nobody there. 1,000 British soldiers had vanished into the cloud. That wasn't exactly a UFO. It was an object that was disguised as a cloud. And they found, you know, teacups and other things, you know, just untouched. I mean, it was as if the people had vanished, but everything else remained pretty much intact, undisturbed. There was no battle, no blood, no bodies, no expenditure of ammunition, no sign of a struggle of any kind. It was as if 1,000 men had just suddenly, voluntarily, got up from their seats or wherever they were, walked over and gotten on board something in a cloud and flew away. Voluntarily. Or perhaps they were, I don't know, hypnotized. Now, that's 1918. In 1917, from May through October of that year, ending on October 13th, there were a series of strange visions where a little girl named Lucia and two of her friends, relatives, who were, oh gosh, I think the oldest, I think Lucia was 9 years old. I mean, they're just children who were barely in grade school. And they saw visions of what at least Lucia could see the face of. The other two couldn't make out her features. But she said was a beautiful lady. And of course, this is the Fatima experiences in Portugal. And she had actually been seeing angels and strange visions for 2 years before that, starting in 1915. And these had continued on and off until March or May, the spring anyway, of 1917. And then they continued for several months, always on the 13th day of the month, which, by the way, I think they used to celebrate Lilith on those days. She had Minerva, Lilith, in her various guises. Anyway, so she's seeing these visions of this beautiful lady who won't tell her who she is. And slowly but surely, there's this kind of striptease as she reveals her true identity, her secret identity, to these little children. Now, there's 1 month where the authorities kept them from seeing anybody, so there was a missed month there. I think it was July. My memory serves me. And then August, September, October, we begin to have, the word gets out. And more people start to show up. In September 13th, 1917, there were 10,000 people who came to watch the children contacted by this strange vision. Now, some witnesses were reporting seeing a glowing orb or something that came down and hovered over this oak tree where there was a little spring. in this shallow bowl-like feature in the landscape. And it was called the Cova de Ira. So it was sort of like, I think that Ira means rainbow, I think, in Portuguese. Don't hold me to that. And they didn't all see something, so it's hard to tell. If everybody saw it, then we could be pretty confident that, that's what was seen. When only a few people reported, it's hard to tell. But in a crowd of 10,000 people, not everybody has eye contact with what's going on. It's not like television where we can all see what's going on. It's a crowd of people on the landscape, and some people had good sight lines and some people didn't. Now, the following month is the final visit, and in September 13th, the woman tells the children, or Lucia anyway, she's the one who could hear what she was saying. This is basically Lucia's game. The other two kids are along for the ride. But Lucia says, well, the beautiful lady said she's going to reveal her identity, and she's going to perform a miracle next month. So October 13th, there were 70,000 people. There were some cameras and news agencies there. The communists and the socialists sent representatives. A lot of people showed up. It was a big deal in Portugal. It's the kind of group of people you would get together for a World Series baseball game. And so, a huge amount of people. You can just imagine what the World Series looks like with all those people in the bleachers and everything and in the stands. Just imagine that many people crammed into this little bowl-shaped valley here in Portugal overlooking the hills that lead out to the coast of Portugal. And so they, and by the way, Fatima is named after Muhammad's daughter. So you can imagine what the history of this place must have been. And down out of the sky, I should mention that Lucia is told by the beautiful woman she points up in the sky and she said, here, look. And so she first shows them a vision of hell to scare the kids, I guess. I don't know what else she'd do that for, but anyway. And then she points up in the sky and she says, here's a sign from God, I guess. I don't know if she called it God or what, but here's a sign anyway that I promised you. And the kids point up in the sky. Everybody looks up. Now, I should mention to you that it's overcast, it's cloudy, and it's drizzly. Sort of like the weather here on the coast of Maine. And they look up in the sky, and they hear a buzzing sound. And then they start to notice that the rain is stopping, and it's getting a little brighter. There's some funny colored lights appearing in the overcast. And then they see it. A large, round, disc-shaped object with colored lights around the rim, made out of gunmetal, colored metal. Sort of figure what a gun looks like, sort of a silvery gray color. It is wobbling in the classic falling leaf motion of UFOs. And on the side of the craft, there's a ladder going up over the top of the object, and there are little creatures crawling on this ladder. We don't know why, but this is seen by some of the people. Now, remember, everybody's got a different sight line. There's tens of thousands of people. Somebody a little farther away can see the top of the craft and see the little creatures. Those down closer to where the little girls are, or the two girls and the boy, I should say, where they are, they couldn't see anything except the bottom of the craft. So it depended on where you were, what you saw. If you're really close and up front and had arrived early and were really devout, you looked straight up and you saw a glowing object in marvelous colored lights and the sun dancing in the sky, and it was the miracle of the sun by the Blessed Virgin. If you were a little further away, up on the hillside, looking down and seeing this object more from the side, in the bleachers, so to speak, out in left field, you saw a classic UFO event. Now, people further away from the local area, but close enough that they could see the object, reported seeing a UFO. It was a classic UFO sighting, and they could see the sun in one part of the sky where they were, and they could see the clouds over Fatima, and they could see the UFO coming down on the cloud cover from where they were. And those sightings are in the record, in the historical record. So there's no question what this was. This was something that was not kosher. It wasn't kosher, and it wasn't Catholic. Okay? And whatever these things were, these creatures were on the craft, what the children were shown was a kind of a holographic image of a beautiful woman. From the wrong angle, which is where Francesco was looking at it, the boy, he couldn't see that it was a woman. He couldn't tell what it was. Jacinta, the youngest, who was about 5 or 6 years old, she looked at it and she thought it looked like a woman, but she couldn't see the face. Francesco could not hear the voice. So whatever this was, it kind of broadcast its image and its sound in a very narrow direction toward Lucia, the eldest child. And the other two children who were to either side of her couldn't really get a good look at her. Other people in the crowd could see that there was some sort of lighted thing there, but not everybody could see it. It suggests that whatever it was some kind of laser projection, that it wasn't really visible from all directions, like a hologram. It had a particular angle that it had to be seen at, and if you looked at it from the wrong angle, you didn't see it. So we're looking at technology here. We're not looking at the Virgin Mary. We're looking at technology. We're looking at technologies that are following hard on an era of airship sightings that were seen sporadically throughout the 19th century and on down until the last airship inventor combination sightings were in 1913. And 2 years later begins the Fatima series, which lasts from 1915 to the last sighting that Lucia had that we know of was in 1948, at which point she was locked up and put away where she couldn't talk about what she was seeing. So we don't know what she saw after that. So she was seeing things for 30-plus years, for over 30 years, for a third of a century at least. So she was apparently a good, receptive person for this material. Now we go back to Nikola Tesla. Here he is, I think, and again, I can't prove this, but I think he's being invited by the government to advise them. And I'm sure that a guy like Grover Cleveland who knew him, would have been interested in getting his advice about it. And I assume that William McKinley, who came from Ohio, which is not too far from Chicago, it's in the Midwest, I'm sure that the guys in Ohio were kind of interested in this. After all, you have to remember that Ohio was where the headquarters of Standard Oil had been, Cleveland. That's where it started. That was the beginning of the Rockefeller oil refining business. And they totally dominated oil refining. What everybody thinks is headquartered in Texas today, it was in Cleveland, where I lived, by the way, for a couple of years when I was young. It was in Cleveland along the Cuyahoga River. And that's where the original refining capital of America was. And so William McKinley came from what in his day was the oil capital of America. And it was therefore of interest to him that Nikola Tesla was concentrating on producing energy not from oil, but from hydroelectric power. So Nikola Tesla represented, if you will, a competing source of information. And I cannot believe that his friends, the Rockefellers, wouldn't have asked William McKinley to please invite Nikola Tesla to the White House and ask him what he knows, because anything this guy knew was golden. I mean, everybody wanted to know what he was up to, because he was threatening the future of the Rockefeller oil interest. He was threatening the future of all kinds of technological interests, like General Electric, what do you call it? I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Thomas Edison, the Edison people, Edison Electric. So there was a lot of interest in this. And guys like Carnegie and guys like John Jacob Astor were deeply interested in what was going on. So there was a lot of pressure on the president, whoever it was. If something like this, these airship sightings were going on and people thought the Martians were invading, there's a lot of pressure to get Nikola Tesla to start talking. What did he know? What could he tell us about all of this? So here was a guy that everybody kind of looked to as the genius who had all the secrets, who had all the answers. It's unthinkable that he wouldn't have been called in to advise the government about this technology. But wait, he clearly, he doesn't develop radio until 30 years after the Navy already was using the technology. He clearly is not an insider. He clearly does not know what technologies were being developed by, if you will, the secret government or whoever it was out there. He's a very bright guy, but he's a foreigner. He's uncontrollable. He has a mind of his own, and he loves to talk. He's a guy who was constantly writing articles and giving interviews and writing letters to the editor of the newspaper and so forth. He was constantly telling everybody what he thought about all this stuff. So he wasn't shy about divulging what he knew, and it's what got him into trouble. Now, they were very interested in whether these guys were from Mars or not. Tesla started to speculate about it. Percival Lowell down in Arizona was making his maps of the canals on Mars. And Nikola Tesla was very much impressed by this. He had questions. He kind of hedged his bets a little bit, but he thought that this indicated that there were intelligent beings on Mars at some point. Whether they were still there or not, he wasn't quite sure. But the way to find out, he said, was to broadcast a communication signal from a high elevation to Mars. And he offered to do that. Now, this is, again, we're back in the 1897 period here. Here's Nikola Tesla, June of 1897, saying, hey, let's see if we can contact these Martians. Okay, these guys are flying around our country. If that's where they're from, if they're from Mars, then we need to contact them. He thought they were an advanced, benevolent race. He thought they were using hydroelectric power as opposed to solar power. He was very interested in making contact with these guys, and he was urging that we do this. All of a sudden, a couple of guys come up with some money. John Jacob Astor and another guy, a lawyer, came up with some money and sent him off to Colorado Springs. And he set up a lab on the slopes of Pikes Peak, which is the tallest mountain, tallest peak in the Rockies, I believe, at 14,000 some odd feet. And he went up on the slopes of Pikes Peak outside of Colorado Springs, and he built this tower that from the ground up was 222 feet high, definitely reaching for the stars, okay? And but he claimed that he was trying to communicate with a colleague in Paris. Now, that claim was false. There was nobody in Paris. There was no colleague over there. He never made any such attempt. There was no communication with Paris. He simply lied and said that's what he was doing. I want to pause here for a moment. Here's a guy who is putting out a cover story about communicating with Paris, who suddenly has been contacted by a lawyer and by John Jacob Astor, who've come up with a ton of money to finance it. He is given access to gargantuan amounts of electrical power for that time, and he is given the tallest mountain in the Rockies to go and set up his equipment. Now, you think that's an accident? You think that's just coincidence? No, that sounds to me like somebody on a secret mission. And he's claiming he was talking to Paris, but he's not talking to Paris. Guess what he says he was doing after the fact? After it's all over, he confesses that he was trying to communicate with Mars. And not only that, he claims he got a message back. Now, Nikola Tesla did his experiments in 1899 and early 1900. Now, you'll notice that he makes his announcement near the end of the airship sightings. He makes an announcement he's going to go do this. The financing comes along as War of the Worlds is out there. So the airship sightings stop just at the point that you would have thought there would have been a ton of new sightings. So they are inversely proportionate to the activity by human beings to investigate them. As the more we got interested in investigating Mars, the fewer airships we saw. Now, think about that for a minute. We see a bunch of airships right after the presidential election. The airship sightings continue until shortly after the new president is sworn in. Nikola Tesla is apparently called in right near the end of the main group of airship sightings and is given a bunch of money to pretend to go contact Paris, but he's actually trying to contact Mars. And then the airship sightings diminish while the government now begins to launch an effort to contact Mars. You don't suppose that whoever was behind the airships was trying to get us to contact Mars?
Boy, that's an interesting thought.
Trying to get us to engage in this technological leap forward? Mm-hmm. And once we started doing it, once McKinley, who had just been elected when they started this, once McKinley agreed to get involved, and once big money got involved in this, all of a sudden the airships went back to wherever they had come from, California perhaps. Mm-hmm. And the first guy to pop up with money happened to be a lawyer. Remember, that's the Skull and Bones people. Now, I don't know if he was Skull and Bones or not, to be honest with you. So, at this point, William McKinley becomes President of the United States. Okay. It's 1898, and Tesla's getting money to go to Colorado Springs. What else is happening in 1898? Why, William McKinley is appointing the son of the co-founder of Skull and Bones, William Howard Taft, to be governor of the Philippines. Because we just won the Spanish-American War. And that seems like an interesting coincidence. And then we have the next thing that happens, as I said, is Nikola Tesla in 1899, 1900, actually literally on New Year's Eve, makes his contact with the Martians. And the only other thing I know that's strange about New Year's Eve and the time that Nikola Tesla chose to do his experiments, that is the moment when the star Sirius is at its highest point in the sky all year long. And Sirius is only 9.8 light years away from us. It's one of the closest stars to our solar system. And in fact, it has been a hot prospect of alien contact people for being inhabited for a long time. And so Nikola Tesla chooses to do his experiment in the night when Sirius is at its highest point in the sky that it will be all year long. But he only did these experiments for a few months. They culminated at the upper culmination of the star Sirius. Now, maybe that's just a coincidence, too. But in any case, he, which by the way was known as Isis by some people, it was the star of Isis. And this experiment was carried on for a few days. He blacked out the El Paso Electric Company, which was the main supplier of power to the experiment. He used enormous amounts of power to send this oscillating signal out to try to communicate, and then he got a signal back. He didn't know what it was, but it sounded to him like an intelligent message from beyond. So Tesla believed that he had contacted Mars. Okay, so everybody is waiting when he holds his press conference to hear what the experiment showed, because they're thinking he's contacted Paris. Has he been able to send a signal to Paris? And remember that Marconi is rushing now because he hears about what Tesla's up to. Marconi is rushing to try to develop his radio technology. And here is Nikola Tesla, and everybody is waiting with bated breath to see what he has accomplished. Tesla stands up and he says, "I believe I have contacted an extraterrestrial civilization." Huh?
Yeah.
We thought you were talking to people in Paris. As I indicated to you, that was not what he was up to at all, and he admitted it. So, those of you who thought I was making this up, I actually have here, I don't know if I should read this over the air, but he has here a whole bunch of things here. He says here, he believes that certain electrical disturbances which he observed in the summer of, it says here 1889, must have emanated from Mars. Okay, but he writes this in in 1909, in June of 1909. So that was a little less than 100 years ago, during the William Howard Taft administration. And he says that. Now, he says, the inhabitants of the planets, Mars, for example, must have intelligence. It is my belief that a serious attempt at transfer of intelligence via radio to Mars will be made within a short time. That was his statement in June of 1897. So there's the before and after. So he's saying we're going to make an attempt to communicate with Mars in 1897. That was in Electrical Engineer magazine, not exactly a big public venue. But then in 1909, in the Journal of Electricity, he said that the signals that he had detected must have emanated from Mars. That's a quote. And he also says here that it's been proposed to convey signals to Mars. And his technology of his own, he states, is simple in principle, although perhaps not easy of execution. This consists first of a circuit properly designed and arranged with one of its ends connected to an insulated terminal at some height, high elevation, and at the other to the Earth. Inductively linked with this is another circuit in which electrical oscillations of great intensity are set up, the above combination being known as the Tesla wireless transmitter. Now, the reason I read that section to you is that's exactly what he did at Colorado Springs on Pikes Peak in 1899. That is exactly a description of his apparatus there. And then he said just prior to, let's see here, this would be again in June of 1897, he says, it is upon the result of a calculation that he was doing about the inhabitants of Mars being intelligent. It is upon the result of this calculation that I base the declaration of my belief that a serious attempt at transfer of intelligence to Mars will be made within a short time. Of course, I mean short in a scientific sense, but I would not undertake to say how short or how long that time will probably be. Now, that was his article in the Electrical Engineer. Notice how cagey he's being, even though he has promptly handed money and set out to do it. He was just waiting for the cash. He was ready to go right away. He had the technology. He knew what he was going to do, and he was just simply waiting for the money to do it. All throughout 1900, he starts writing articles after he gets back from Colorado Springs and into 1901, telling people about his ideas concerning communication with Mars, the technologies that were needed to successfully set up detailed exchanges of information between the Martians and people on Earth and so forth. And his announcements, which were made in all seriousness and which he believed were quite valid on into 1901, suddenly were met with ridicule by the scientific community. And they were laughing at him. And they said, oh, this is ridiculous. This is absurd. So for 43 years of his life, he was on top of the world. Everything was going his way. All of a sudden, after he starts talking about communicating with Mars, they start making fun of him. They start ridiculing him. But he keeps insisting that he's had some communication with Mars. Now he gets money from J.P. Morgan. The name Morgan's been in the news last year or so because of all the bank problems and the investment banking mergers and everything. The Morgan Bank's been part of all of that. But he was getting money from J.P. Morgan to set up another tower. This one was on Long Island, so it was at sea level as opposed to up on a mountaintop. But it was a very tall tower. And he was starting to test this tower in 1909 when William Howard Taft became President of the United States. So now we have a Skull and Bonesman, the son of the co-founder of the Skull and Bones Society, has become President of the United States in March 4th of 1909, just a shade over 100 years ago. 100 years ago and 1 month as of today. And all of a sudden, the Navy, you remember the guys who invented radio 30 years before Tesla? The Navy comes along and tears down his tower.
Oh.
And they haul it off. I think it was in New Jersey a while, where Thomas Edison was located, where the Edison labs were. And then it disappears. And the technology and Tesla and everything begin to become eclipsed. By 1915, notice that is the very year that the angelic sightings begin in Portugal. In 1915, Tesla declares bankruptcy, supposedly. He has nothing, supposedly, yet he continues to live in the Waldorf Astoria and luxury hotels for the rest of his life. And he disappears from public view. And he is said to be a broken man. And he simply vanishes into obscurity, still living in the same hotel rooms in New York, still doing his inventing, still talking to important people and meeting with foreign engineers and scientists and so forth, still doing the same old stuff. Only now, he concentrates on some new technologies. Before he was inventing, electrical transformers and electrical motors and hydroelectric facilities and, more efficient light bulbs and, motors for submarines and stuff like that. Now suddenly Tesla takes a totally different tack. He begins to talk about particle beam weapons, about laser type weapons, about shooting down aircraft, airships maybe. He is coming up with a whole series of weapons designed to destroy things like airships aircraft, and even missiles. In fact, his technology was so advanced and his thinking was so sound that the U.S. government was still attempting to research it and apply it in the 1980s.
Wow.
Now, I've got, anybody can find this. Just go on the web and type in Tesla technology, and you'll find it. But the interesting thing about this is, they said that when they experimented with Tesla's technologies and his ideas, that almost everything he said turned out to work and be true. In other words, they could actually do what he was drawing on a piece of paper. They could create this stuff. The one thing they claimed they couldn't accomplish was to create a standing wave on the Earth. Now, that was the one thing they failed to do, but they were able to do everything else. And, of course, that included particle beam weapons, all kinds of amazing things. And think about this for a minute. What were we doing in the early 1980s when they get all excited about this? SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative of Ronald Reagan. In other words, an anti-missile technology operating from space. And what did Reagan say? Do you remember? He said that the nations of the world should pay more attention to the potential of fighting an enemy from space. Mm-hmm. He started talking, and of course everybody laughed at him just like they laughed at Tesla. He was discussing the idea that we might one day have to use these weapons to target something outside of the Earth.
Wow.
All right. Well, wait a minute here. This is starting, now we talked about Tesla, we talked about Mars. Tesla said, right after his contacts with Mars, he said that he had seen a new world. Now, I don't know that he had seen this with his technology, but that he was envisioning the future of our world. And in this future world, he saw things like portable, wireless, telephone, and television, color television communication devices that people would carry with them with no wires and allow them to check their stock market investments from wherever they were in the world. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
That's the iPhone. That's the BlackBerry. That's current technology. And he described a whole bunch of things that sound very much like the technologies that we have in the world today. And I was particularly struck by this one, this specific one, because we know where this technology is going to go. They're experimenting with heads-up displays that you would wear like a pair of glasses, and that you would receive the communication, and it would be projected like a pair of lenses in front of you, so you could literally see heads-up displays of whatever it was you wanted to look at, while you were communicating with this little wireless device hanging on your ear and a little wire coming around to where your mouth is, you know, like one of these operators, receptionists, headsets, that kind of thing. So we know where the future, I mean, all that technology is available, by the way. We know where the future is, and this would also be able to project a 3D holographic image in front of you that would appear to hover in front of you, okay? So we know where the technology will go in another, 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, 10 years at the most. We know where it is right now. And so here's Nikola Tesla, right after he has this experience, where, by the way, he sits in this room with huge amounts of electrical energy coursing around him. There are people who think he got some of his ideas from psychic visions. I'm not saying he did. I'm just saying there are people who think that. Okay? And then suddenly, after supposedly hearing a little Morse code-like radio signal from Mars, he comes out talking about incredibly bizarre technologies. Do you remember Dick Tracy? Wrist radio thing where people would go around talking to their little wrist radios?
Yeah.
Well, we got that now. We're past that. We've got color pictures, color video. Dick Tracy didn't have that. The Dick Tracy technology was based on Nikola Tesla's ideas. So they brought it out in the form of a cartoon, a comic book. And then they have the Superman comics come out. And you know who his opponent was? Who the bad guy was? Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was one of the villains that Superman had to overcome, the guy who was the inventor of the great technologies, you see, the mad scientist. It's amazing some of the things that they did with Tesla's ideas. In other words, they took his technologies and they developed them, but at the same time, they ridiculed him publicly. And they made Tesla a laughingstock until they got him out of public view. Now, as long as Teddy Roosevelt and McKinley were president, Nikola Tesla was free to say whatever he wanted in public. But when William Howard Taft, the son of the co-founder of Skull and Bones, became president, all of a sudden, Nikola Tesla fell silent. A few weeks after Taft became president, bad things started happening to Nikola Tesla's technologies, his tower on Long Island, Tesla himself, his finances. Everything started to go downhill for him until he stopped talking. Now, I don't think you silence a guy who is talking nonsense. I think you silence somebody who's letting the cat out of the bag. Remember what I said about Grover Cleveland calling Nikola Tesla to Washington to advise him, and if he had 11 other guys, it would be MJ-12? Well, what if there were 11 other guys? What if every smart scientist that they could find was brought to Washington, and Tesla was just one of them? What if a whole bunch of guys were advising Grover Cleveland and then William McKinley? And what if Tesla wasn't getting his ideas from the Martians at all? What if he was getting them by having conversations with people who were involved in black ops, people who were the kind of guys that were at the Aeronautics Club out in California, the kind of people, in other words, who were way ahead of what the public knew about in technology. And Tesla was so impressed. He got on the inside with these guys. He was so impressed by all of this that his mind started working on some of the things that he heard as he got into casual conversations with the other advisors. And he began discussing these in the context of his Mars ideas. And a lot of people thought, uh-oh, we already are in contact with alien beings, with craft. We are already doing this. We don't want Tesla making too many connections out in public because people will start to put the puzzle together. They'll start to make sense out of this. Airships plus aliens equals a group of people trying to influence William McKinley into doing something that apparently they didn't think he would do without some urging. Somewhere in this matrix of strange connections, I think there is some kind of origination for the MJ-12 type of phenomena, where you have a kind of a secret government scientific panel coming up with high technology, loaning it, as it were, to the government in exchange for certain favors back and forth, trading it off, where a group of people like the Skull and Bones people are outside the government and using the government, manipulating the government with the technologies they have funded outside of the government. I sound like Richard Hoagland, don't I? But that's what Richard's talking about, the kind of thing that's going on out there today. I think that maybe it got started back in the days of Nikola Tesla, and that he was looking ahead to a future time that he had, that somebody had made some contact with. And I got to thinking about this. What if in 1899, 1900, New Year's Eve there, what if when he drew all that power and sent that big bolt of electricity out into the ether, what if he did something to time? What if he disturbed something? What if he disturbed the dimensional framework in which we live? What if he screwed things up somehow? And the reason they wanted to shut him up and get him out of the way and bring his tower down was not necessarily because they wanted to use his technology or steal it, but because they wanted to keep him from using it again, because they wanted to keep his ideas out of the public sector, because somebody had figured out, the other smart people that Tesla talked to but didn't really pal around with, maybe they had figured out that Tesla had disturbed our dimensional frame of reference in some way, that he had caused a problem, that it had interfered with something. Perhaps it had interfered with a technology that they were developing. Maybe it interfered in some other way, but they were troubled by it enough to say to their friends, got to find a way to stop Tesla before he starts using this tower, because if he does this again, then he's going to create some kind of dimensional problem. He's going to do something bad. Or maybe not bad. But whatever it is, they needed to stop it. Not just shut him up, but tear down that tower. Don't let anybody else build one. And stop experimenting with that whole branch of technology, at least publicly. Something about it had gotten back to whoever it was, the people who put up the money perhaps. As I suggested to you, there may have been Skull and Bones money in it. And these guys said, nope, we don't want this out. They kept radio secret for over 30 years. They kept flight from being publicly available, let us say, for half a century. Who knows what technologies they had available? And they didn't want those technologies to be pursued. And Tesla was at least 80 to 100 years ahead of his time. Actually, technically, he's over a century ahead of his time. He saw technologies that we now are taking for granted, but they were not taken for granted prior to 2007. You couldn't do this stuff till the iPhone came out. You know, we had cell phones, but the idea of having colored internet connections and being able to check your stock quotes and that sort of thing, I don't know, maybe the BlackBerry was doing it. I may stand to be corrected on this. But this is brand new technology. And it's only since the 21st century began that we have been able to do the things that Nikola Tesla was talking about at the beginning of the 20th century, 100 years ago. He either saw something, had a vision, maybe an electromagnetic time warp thing where he could see the future. I don't know. He saw something. And it's almost like, well, you know what radio is? I mean, look at the device he was talking about. You plug one end into the ground, the other end goes up into the ether, and then you try to communicate with somebody at the other end. Well, what's missing here? The circuit. is not a completed circuit, technically. I mean, in Tesla's mind, it is because he believes in the electrical current going through the ground and coming up out of the air somewhere else, somewhere. But when you're communicating to Mars this way and trying to send a beam of energy out to the planets and so forth, the communication has to come back to you by somebody else at the other end doing something, right? You've got to have a receiver if you're going to send. There's got to be somebody at the other end. There's got to be an echo point to bring this back to you so you've accomplished something, so you know that you've got an answer. Well, what if the technology that he was trying to communicate with hadn't been invented until our future? Suppose that technology isn't going to come into being until, say, 2012. And suppose what Tesla did was tune in to our future, into the world we now live in, world of cell phones and iPhones and BlackBerries and all kinds of strange laser weapons and devices and so forth, the kinds of technologies that he could see back then from some kind of experience that he had. And I don't know if Tesla simply got a big jolt of electricity and then suddenly these ideas popped into his head and he didn't know where they came from. I don't know if he somehow deciphered a message or heard something or saw a vision of something. I don't know what it was. But he went from a guy fiddling with transformers and electric motors that would run a refrigerator to a guy who's talking about global cell phone technology and color video, which, by the way, there was no video yet. We didn't even have color motion pictures yet and wouldn't have for decades. It wasn't until he was near the end of his life that we saw the first color motion pictures. So, to say nothing of color video. My goodness, color TV sets didn't come into existence until the 1950s. This guy was so far ahead of things, and he's talking about wireless, portable, handheld devices that would do this. He's describing the technology you can now buy in your local Walmart, but you couldn't 5 years ago. And that tells me, at least I get a deep suspicion that he knew something. And the world that he describes is consistently our world. It's not like he's picking a technology out of the 40s and one out of the 90s and another one out of the 2100s or something. It's this world he's seeing. The world of 2012, if you will. Our time in history. He looked ahead 100 years, or maybe 112 years, and saw what was about to happen. In some sense, whether it was he woke up one morning and he had a strange dream, I don't know where he got it from. He never really explained it. But for 9 years afterwards, until he was shut up by the Taft administration or whoever it was who shut him up, Nikola Tesla was blabbing about all these strange ideas and visions and inventions. And then, as quickly as it all started, after 9 years, it suddenly went silent. He stopped talking. He went private. He still did some business with typically foreign governments, but he ceased to make a lot of public statements. They did interview him, I think, for his 70th birthday or something. But, it was the kind of mild, general, vague statements that you expect from politicians. He didn't reveal anything. His only interest that came out during that period was in finding some way to shoot down craft with particle beams and strange weapons, ray guns, that kind of thing. That was the only public topic that he seemed to discuss after that. I don't know what he was. I don't know what he was up to. People say, well, the FBI got all his papers after he died and so forth. The FBI never touched his papers. They never got a hold of them. If you look at the historical record, they never laid hands on the papers. But we do know there were two groups who did get his papers, who did get to see them. They were the Office of Naval Intelligence and the Central Intelligence Agency, which was then known as the OSS. Those are the only two groups we can be sure of that actually had access to all of Tesla's papers. Later on, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the ones that investigated UFOs, they did get some of Tesla's materials, or copies of it. We know that. But as far as the FBI is concerned, no, they weren't involved. So you want to blame somebody, there's a lot of people you can point fingers of accusation at. We know the Russians eventually got a chunk of Tesla's papers. They certainly had some information. But the FBI didn't, and why would they? I mean, what would they do with it? They're not into technology. It didn't, the technology they wanted was stuff that would allow you to figure out somebody's fingerprints, taken off of a piece of cloth or something. That'd be high tech for the FBI. Maybe a communications device, but hell, we all have these kinds of communications today. I don't think that the FBI had any particular interest. All of the evidence shows the FBI was basically trying to stay out of the line of fire. They were letting other people do their dirty work, so to speak, in terms of looking at the papers and figuring out the inventions and that kind of thing. A lot of people talk about 2012. They expect some change in time or consciousness or spirituality or whatever. I talk about Mars in 2012 and 2013 more specifically. I think something important is about to happen. I think that it's going to affect all the technologies on this planet. There are other people who have different theories, but there seems to be a general feeling, a general agreement that something odd is going to occur between the time that Obama's running for re-election and the new president is sworn in and starts to do, did I say new president? Was that a slip of the tongue? Is that a Sarah Palin reference? I don't know. But whoever is president in 2013, if we have an election, judging from the way things are going, we may not have another election, but you never know. And all of this suggests that maybe the fact that Tesla was looking at our time in history, somehow envisioning it, somehow inventing it, if you will, seeing in his mind's eye what was coming for us, that maybe what is going to happen in 2012 was the other end of the communication system. It wasn't Mars that talked back to Tesla. It was us. We sent a signal back without realizing. We experimented with something. And whatever it is, and I don't know, some people think CERN over in Europe, this nuclear experiment that they're going to be conducting with high-energy physics, that CERN thing is going to have something to do with it. You know, this summer of 2009, they're going to have the Angels and Demons, the prequel actually to the Da Vinci Code. And it's about CERN. And it's about the possible weird effects that might be generated by that technology. Very interesting, very hot topic, and interesting timing here that is coming out this summer. This December, they're going to have a movie called 2012. And it's supposed to be about some big, destructive, amazing things that are going to happen in 2012. Who knows? But, I've got a lot of CDs and a lot of stuff. I've done my share of speculating about what's going to happen, and I think some of it's more than speculation, but hey, that's what each person thinks who comes up with a theory. They think they got the answer. We do have a few years here to watch this unfold. Not too many now. We're down to the big countdown here. It's about a little over 3.5 years away now. And we know who the president will be, unless, something happens to Obama and he becomes king of the universe. Biden has to take over. But all of these events are going to unfold with this specter of Nikola Tesla kind of haunting us. And it's interesting. All of a sudden, there's this huge wave of interest in Tesla over the last few years. It's getting more and more intense as people are interested in alternative energy, for example. People are very interested in Mars. All the things that were hot topics 100 years ago are back.
Yeah.
And the question might be raised, so where are the airships? Well, they're there too, aren't they? In Stevensville, Texas. The same places where some of the airship sightings occurred a little over 100 years ago, we're seeing sightings again. We had a whole bunch of sightings over O'Hare Field in Chicago. Curiously, there were sightings in Chicago back 100 years ago. There's a whole bunch of things. There were sightings in Ohio. Very strange. There was a human abduction case in Ohio in 1900, I believe it was. There was an amazing thing happened in Kansas or Nebraska. I forget now. I think it was Kansas. Yeah, Leroy, Kansas, in April of 1897. There was a cattle mutilation done by a bunch of strange creatures in a UFO. There have been a number of these very bizarre incidents. Everybody says, oh, this all started, after Steven Spielberg. Yeah, it was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That's what started all this. No, it wasn't.
Oh,
it was Roswell, it was all that Roswell stuff, No, it wasn't. Well, it was them Foo Fighters, during World War II. No, it wasn't. Oh, this has been going on. And the thing that's uncertain in my mind is how much of this came from aliens, or as the guy in Kansas who saw his calf taken up into the craft, he says, I don't know if they're angels or devils. I don't know what they were, but they took my calf. And then the calf was found dropped, mutilated, just like modern mutilations. In a field of mud.
Olaf, what is your thought on the purpose of these mutilations? I mean, they're terrible.
Well, they've been going on, as I say, for over 100 years.
Yeah.
Longer. And so I don't think it's any current thing that we're doing. This is something they were doing all along. And they take certain parts of the animal. They're not testing the animal. They're taking from the animal.
Right.
Leave behind the parts of the animal we normally eat. The muscle meat. Okay? They leave behind the parts that you put on your plate. Okay? Now, think about it from an alien viewpoint. We're only taking the parts we eat.
Oh, my gosh.
Parts you eat.
Oh, gee.
Okay? In other words, we're taking what we want from the animal, and we're giving you what you want from the animal. So why are you complaining? In other words, the aliens give us back the muscle meat carcasses because they think that's what we want to eat. That's what we throw the rest of it away. We throw away those ears and eyeballs. We don't ground them up and feed them to our dogs or in hot dogs. But we're not interested in the parts they take. I mean, when was the last time you went to a nice restaurant and said, gee, I'd like some cow uterus, please?
Oh, gosh.
Could you, I'd like a side of eyeballs.
Oh, no.
Well, that's the parts they're taking. Now, are they eating them? I don't know.
It's creepy.
I don't know what they're doing with them.
That's so creepy.
It is creepy.
Oh.
But, they'll take the left eye and leave the right.
Yeah.
Well, the left eye is a delicacy where they come from, but the right eye is for the masses. We don't eat right eyeballs. We only eat left eyeballs. I don't know. They take certain things and they leave others. Here's a thought. They take one eyeball and they leave the other because in their culture it's considered uncouth to eat both eyeballs. You always share the other one with a friend.
Oh, my goodness. But, Olaf, there have been the remains of human beings were reported that have been cannibalized were reported in one of the so-called UFO crashes. I mean...
They found a crashed UFO and inside the craft...
Yeah.
The animal that had been mutilated. Yeah, we say mutilated, but it's like laser beams are used to excise these organs without shedding any blood. No blood's ever been found in any cattle mutilation, ever. They cauterize the wounds with the laser. So they cut out an organ, it doesn't leave blood. Now, there's something else I remember in the back of my mind. Doesn't the law of Moses try to eliminate blood from the process of animal slaughter? They want a bloodless slaughter. They drain the blood out of the animal and then you cut up the meat. And why do they do that? Well, if you read the law of Moses and you read it carefully and you think about it, all of the things that the law of Moses is addressing, or most of them, have to do with human hormones.
Yeah.
They're trying to avoid hormonal contamination. So what would happen if you used a laser to make sure you didn't lose any of the hormones, that you retained them? Because it turns out that with a lot of these animals, when they go, the blood's all drained out of the body.
Yeah.
All the hormones are gone, and the hormone-rich parts of the body are missing. The uterus is full of hormones. The parts of the body that are hormone-rich have been removed.
Whoa.
So God says, don't eat the hormone-rich parts of the animal. Don't touch the hormone-rich animal. Don't eat an animal that's died violently, whose tissues are full of hormones. Okay?
Yeah.
Don't touch your wife when she's having her period, when she is full of hormones, when the hormones are draining out of her, the blood. Don't do that. Avoid hormone contamination at all costs. Don't let these hormones touch you, because they're readily absorbed into your body. By the way, the slightest contact with hormones will trigger that reaction in your body. If you have, for example, if you touch somebody who has low blood sugar, they're having a low blood sugar reaction in their body, and the what do you call it? The pancreatic insulin is flowing through their system. You will have a low blood sugar reaction too, without eating anything or doing anything in your diet. You just have them touch you. It transfers through the skin just from touching someone. So when it says in the Bible, don't touch your wife at all, any of her clothing during the time that she's menstruating, they mean it. Don't touch her. Don't.
Well, and that's why that they would have the women sleep in a different area.
Absolutely.
During her period.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the animals, the same thing. If an animal dies violently out in the field, you do not eat that animal. You do not touch it. And in fact, in the book of Ezekiel, it talks about in Ezekiel 39, I believe it is, after this terrible destruction, when fire comes down out of heaven and destroys all of this army of Gog and Magog at the end of the 1,000-year millennium after Christ's return and so forth. Pause for effect for those who think that Hal Lindsey's right about it being before the millennium, even though the Bible says it's after. Okay, resuming our show here. That
was good, Olaf.
Throw those little time bombs into the discussion. But they go out into the fields afterwards, and they have special people who are barriers to bury the dead bodies of the people and the animals that are lying out in the field who've been killed in this event. Now, what is fire coming down out of heaven in the sight of men and killing people like that? Presumably from God, it says there. What does that have to do with our near future? Well, some people are expecting the two witnesses to show up. There's one guy over in Jerusalem right now claiming to be one of the two witnesses. They think Obama's the Antichrist. Maybe even Obama thinks he's the Antichrist. I don't know how deluded he is, but people think it's the end of the world and 2012 is the second coming. No, it isn't. But they think that, this is the end and the next 3.5 years are going to unfold and so on. I wouldn't put it past the kind of people who would put on an airship show or Fatima events or whatever. We've talked about this before. I wouldn't put it past them to stage a 3.5-year phony tribulation with a phony Antichrist and a phony mark of the beast, phony phony false prophet, phony two witnesses. You got to fake everything. You start this process, you got to fake it all. You can't just bring out an Antichrist figure. You got to fake the whole 9 yards. Because the people you're trying to convince, the people who believe in those prophecies, they're expecting a mark of the beast. They're expecting persecution. They're expecting a false prophet. They're expecting the two witnesses. They're expecting all this other stuff. You can't just hold a big war and have an Antichrist and think that's going to cover it. Nope, you got to go the whole distance. You got to have everything. That's going to take a lot of lasers and a lot of holograms.
Yeah, it sure is.
Okay, and it's going to take 2 volunteers to go to Jerusalem and be the two witnesses. I don't know how much they're going to pay those guys. I don't know when they're going to show up exactly, but my guess is that if you count 3.5 years back from December 21st of 2012, because that seems to be the date they're going to fiddle with. Yeah. Okay. My guess is that would be June of this year, June 21st, or there a little after maybe, because 1,260 days. If that's what it's going to be, or early July, sometime within the first 6 months of the Obama administration. What did I say? Shh. I shouldn't be talking about that.
No, the FBI will investigate.
Oh, no, the first 6 months of the Obama administration, you're not supposed to mention what's going to happen, because Joe Biden whispered to me one day when I was contributing to the campaign.
Oh, gee.
And he said to me, I'm making this up, of course, he said, in the first 6 months of the Obama administration, there's going to be a test. There's going to be something that's going to happen on the international stage. One of these areas of the world, I don't know, Middle East maybe, one of these areas of the world where tensions are high, and he's got to be tested, because every president gets tested. But and he's got to do something, and you're going to think he's doing the wrong thing, but just be patient. Stick with us. Hang in there, because when it's all over, you'll discover that everything's going to work out just fine.
Oh, boy.
Really? What page of the script is that on now? Let me see that. I want to look ahead. I want to see the future parts of this movie script we're all living in. Oh, yeah, here it is. Yeah. Obama solves the day, and everybody celebrates his poll numbers go up. Yeah, that's in what, August? Okay, fine. All right, well, let's wait. Let's wait till that all unfolds, because somebody told Biden, and Biden told some investors. We all heard it, because somebody had a cell phone. They recorded it. And it was played endlessly on talk radio. So we all heard this. They got something planned. And it's going to begin about the time that the 3.5-year countdown to December of 2012 begins. So isn't it interesting that they got this scenario set up here with everybody, even the right-wing talk radio guys, talking about Obama as if he's the Antichrist? I mean, they say he's the Messiah, Well, what does that mean? He's not Jesus, so he can't be that Christ. So he must be the other guy, right? I mean, there's a not very subtle message being sent out here.
You bet.
And I get people all the time asking me, well, don't you think he could be the Antichrist? Or what do you think? Is this the end? Or are we getting close? And so forth and so on. Like, I don't have all of these CDs out there, all the internet stuff, and all the downloads and everything, talking about all these things. And I will say, I mean, if you don't want to go listen to all the downloads and CDs and so on, I will say, I don't believe that anything other than some major earth changes are going to occur in 2012. I don't think it's the Antichrist. I think there may be a fake one. But I don't think the real Antichrist is going to show up until 2013 or beyond, somewhere after 2013. Because until the days are cut short, just read your Bible, until the days are cut short, until they are reduced to what I believe will be a 16-hour day by a close cosmic encounter, and Mars is my candidate for that. Until that happens, something has to knock Mars out of orbit, obviously. Till that happens, I do not believe you're going to see the real Antichrist. But I do believe that there are people out there with Black Ops technology, people with Tesla-style technology, people with holographic technology, people with all kinds of stuff who are capable, not only technologically, but philosophically and spiritually, of faking a 3.5-year tribulation, an Antichrist, a false prophet, 2 witnesses, and putting their own candidate for Messiah and world ruler on the stage. There are people capable of doing that sort of thing. I would not be surprised if somebody were to run a 3.5-year scenario on us like that. That wouldn't surprise me in the least. The kind of people who develop these technologies and hide them for decades and destroy a man like Tesla, or at least suppress him, they don't want to kill him because he might come up with something else that we need. So they let him live. But the kind of people who would do this and then vilify the man who invented modern technological electronic society. We wouldn't have it without Tesla, okay? But they vilified him for decades, even though without this man, we wouldn't have the electronic world we have. The kind of people who would do that to him, the kind of people who would hide stuff from us that might solve all kinds of problems, kind of people who maybe have cures for diseases they don't tell you about, or who know how to fill the sea with fish in a few weeks using iron sulfate.
The medical profession, they're still using the ancient technology of X-rays, killing people with X-rays.
Well,
yeah,
burn it out, cut it out, or poison it out.
Yeah.
It's the basic formula here. Now, look, I want to ask you a simple question. What kind of mentality says that if you got somebody who's sick, that's what you do to them?
Yeah.
I did that to a healthy, well person. What do you think would be their condition after a healthy person had radioactive beams aimed at them, was continually X-rayed, was forced to swallow radioactive barium, was put through a magnetic resonance imaging device, was given all kinds of powerful drugs with horrible side effects. You hear these things on TV where they'll cure your sniffles, but the side effects are stroke and heart attack. I cut out a few of their basic organs, and then we put you on chemotherapy, where we pour the equivalent of automobile antifreeze in your veins.
Oh, gee, yeah.
It collects in your belly, like a giant beach ball full of green slime, while your body goes into self-destruct mode. And your hair falls out, and so remember, you were perfectly healthy to start with.
People live a long time with cancers, and they never knew they had cancer.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason they lived a long time is because they stayed away from the doctors.
Well, statistically, it's a very interesting number concerning all of this.
Yeah.
The medical profession has a certain cure rate, which they claim that the people who they diagnose with cancer, a certain number of them survive various kinds of cancer. So that's known as the cure rate. The cure rate at the hands of the medical profession has remained relatively stagnant for decades.
Yeah.
There's been no significant improvement in terms of the medical treatment for cancer and the number of survivors versus the people with a particular kind who come to them. So if you had lung cancer, your chances of survival are pretty much the same for that same stage of the disease as they were before. They haven't come up with anything really new. The chemotherapies were developed in the 1940s. Radiation therapy was developed in the early 1950s, shortly afterwards. Surgery goes back to the 19th century and before. So basically, they haven't got anything really new. Okay, the only new breakthroughs in the realm of cancer have to do with gene therapy and nutritional and hormonal therapy and things having to do with vitamin D and sunlight, stuff like that. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's showing promise. Okay, now the public has been self-treating itself. That was a weird sentence that I wish I hadn't said. The public has been self-treating, self-medicating with vitamins and nutrition and so on, something the medical profession would dearly like to stop them from doing.
And they're going to.
Okay, and yeah, they're working hard to try to prevent it.
Yeah.
But what has the result been? The number of people getting cancer has been falling like a rock. We have seen huge drops, 20% drop in breast cancer rates since 1972.
Yeah.
Drops all across the board in most cancers, except those related to cell phones, apparently, over the last decade. Huge drops in cancers related to estrogen since the doctors stopped prescribing estrogens like they used to.
Yeah, who wants horse pee? That's what those pills are made out of. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's mare's hormones, which gets us back to the hormone contamination.
Yeah, exactly. Olaf, we've run over 2 hours.
You wanted to get into animal healing.
Yeah, I know. Well, we need to do another file. That's just, it's, oh boy, it's outrageous.
It gets into a whole slew of different bugaboos. I have an article for people interested in that on my website about these kinds of issues. So you can go to the timequest.com and there's an article up there about it. And then I have tons of CDs on this. There are downloads about these subtopics and so forth that before 2012 and beyond.com. And that's what keeps me alive, folks. If you go there and you order that stuff, that's what keeps me functioning, especially if you subscribe, which helps us to have a regular, predictable monthly income from these things. Very important. By the way, speaking of Nikola Tesla, in this summer, the subscribers who have caught up to date with the series will be receiving our big report on Nikola Tesla, including all kinds of stuff which we didn't talk about here, but documentation for the stuff we did talk about. Lots of illustrations, all kinds of interesting stuff about Tesla and his work. And you'll be able to read what Tesla wrote in his own words, and the things he said about Mars, and what happened when he died, all that stuff, all the juicy, gory details. And that will be in the eyes-only report that will accompany whatever 6&8T is. Number 24, CD 24, which is coming out this summer. So right now, this month, we're on CD 20, I believe. I think that's where we are. I think we're on CD 20 at the moment, for April. So we have a lot of interesting stuff coming up. And of course, we got all the amazing stuff about the Holy Grail, about the barge of King Arthur. The stuff like that is coming out right now for those who are subscribers to the CDs. They're getting that material. I've taken the old reports, I'm updating them so that when you get them, some of that material is literally days old. So I try to keep things updated. We have new audio updates that go with it. So I try to keep people as up-to-date as I'm able to, because I make mistakes like anybody else. I'm a human being, and I screw up all the time. So I like to go back and correct those errors and get that stuff updated so that people who are subscribers will always have the best stuff that I'm able to come up with in the updates. And course, the downloads are usually fairly up to date as well, because all the updates are less than a year old. Because all the updates are a few weeks old when they come out. But the downloads, those download files over at before2012andbeyond.com, we didn't start those till last August. So those are all pretty new stuff. So if anybody's interested, we have a lot of stuff on 2012 over there, and about comets and other stuff related to all of that, and things that are happening right now have already started in the heavens and nobody's paying attention to, but we've been tracking, and we're going to keep you well informed about that. So go to before2012andbeyond.com for the latest information we have there that we don't talk about here on the Bite Show.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't.
Some of this stuff is just too hot for even internet radio.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Oh, Olaf, God bless you, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
For you're welcome. For the information that you put together, connecting the dots. It's very helpful. So everybody, do go to before2012andbeyond.com. Let's keep food on Olaf's table.
And Georgianne's too. She's got CDs for sale over at that website as well.
Yeah.
That's not my website. It's not Georgianne's website. These are people who are good people and who do this stuff for us and handle all of this. It's a big burden to handle all this duplication, shipping, and everything, labeling, get this stuff out to you. They're very prompt, and they do a great job.
So God bless all of you out there listening. And Olaf and I will be back, God willing, soon. So keep watching and buy some of Olaf's CDs, subscribe to them. You are in for a real treat. Good night, everybody.